I mean, I think there's a number of teams that did that last year. The Panthers come to mind when they went out in free agency and got a couple top guards and really changed the dynamic of their offense. There's no question that you can change the dynamic of a room just like that.
And just like that, the Bears overhauled 2/3 of the interior of their offensive line in less than 24 hours before the start of free agency. Will they add even more next week and in the draft? And where will Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson line up? Plus, does the length of Will Campbell's arms actually matter? Tom Thayer tells us this week on the Offseason. Hello, everyone, and welcome into the offseason. I'm Cassie Carlson, joined in studio by the Chicago Tribune's Bears beat writer, Dan Wiederer. And it has been a busy couple days for the Chicago Bears. We thought free agency was going to be a busy time for them with addressing the offensive line. They get a head start, making 2 trades right away with Jonah Jackson and then Joe Thuney. Your reaction to both of those?
Yeah, this is supposed to be the bridge week where you catch your breath after the combine and you ease your way into free agency. The Bears did not make it a bridge week that was very relaxing. They obviously were very aggressive in going out and addressing what we all identified as their biggest need to bolster that offensive line in front of Caleb Williams. And they do so in a manner that brings them 2 players that are proven. And Joe Thuney, I have to tell you, Cassie, my jaw hit the floor when I saw that trade earlier this week because it is the addition of a proven all-pro talent and a guy who never misses time. And so this is an offensive lineman who has missed 2 regular season games in his entire career and has 4 Super Bowl rings. You do the math on that, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, what was your reaction to the Jonah Jackson trade? Because at first I thought, okay, this guy played in LA, obviously had some injury concerns last year and kind of left out of the rotation. But then he also played for Ben Johnson in Detroit, where he was an all-pro. That one didn't move the needle as much for me. But then seeing that paired with the Joe Thuney, I was like, all right, now I feel like the Bears are legit players this offseason.
Well, right, and you heard from Ryan Poles last week at the Combine talking about how when you have a very clear vision of what you want to get done, you can be aggressive. And clearly they had a clear vision and were aggressive. And I think the familiarity box with Ben Johnson having that 4-season run in Detroit with Jonah Jackson gives him an understanding of who the player is. He's obviously well regarded by people in Detroit for what he brought to that locker room, a presence in there, a guy who handles his work with great seriousness. The big situation now is trying to figure out what happened last year in L.A. because the Rams signed him to a huge deal last year in free agency, and he went in to free agency a year ago as a very highly sought-after offensive lineman and then only played 4 games and obviously lost his job by the end of the year and was made available here. But you now have added 2 interior line starters that give you a great jump start on this offseason, and now you can start to address other needs.
As you just mentioned, you can't argue that Joe Thuney is, one of the best guards in the league right now. 32 years old, 9 seasons in the NFL, only missed 2 games, played in 3 Super Bowls in his first 3 seasons, won 2 in New England, 2 in Kansas City as well, 2-time Pro Bowler. And I think it's important because this guy's a winner and he's durable. Bears only had to give up a 4th-round pick next year. And I think the winner part is important, especially on the offensive line. Set the tone in that locker room, because I remember having conversations with people last year of, where did it go wrong in that 10-game losing streak? And I'm like, they have no one in that locker room that knows what it feels like and what it looks like to take and what it takes to win.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's a really big deal with Joe Thuney having played the start of his career in New England, the last several years in Kansas City.
Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, and let's hope Caleb Williams amounts to something
he knows what
similar.
It looks like, right? And so he's going to be able to identify red flags. He's going to be able to be, as you said, a tone setter and a guy that is just going to bring it every day. And when you can be a general manager or a coach and you can put your head on the pillow every Saturday night knowing that guy's going to be available to you on game day, it's a great feeling. The Bears haven't had that. We know how many different combinations of offensive line starters, offensive linemen they've had over these last several years. And now you can just take Thuney and put him in Sharpie in your depth chart and really walk into the season understanding that he's going to play for you every single week.
You mentioned the question mark around Jonah Jackson and the fact that he did deal with injuries in L.A. after signing a big free agent deal. This is what Dan Miller, he is the voice of the Detroit Lions, had to say about Jonah Jackson on First and North.
Anytime you tell me you're adding Jonah Jackson to your team, I tell you that's a good thing because you got a good guy and you got a talented guy. I just need to know that this was not some sort of fall off in terms of his abilities last year. I'm guessing it was more injury related, and if it was, the Bears got themselves a good, versatile piece in the middle of that offensive line.
All right, so that's Dan Miller saying that you had a good guy in the locker room, but the big question mark is what happened in L.A. But by all accounts, It's that he handled it very professionally, and given the circumstances, he was a good locker room guy and was very mature in how he handled it, which is good news to Bears ears, who are, I think, a little bit jaded.
Sure.
We talked about the Nate Davis comparison, and you said you can't make that comparison, but I think there's reason to be concerned given the history of what they have brought in the past.
Right. It's Nate Davis. It's Ryan Bates, obviously a guy that they traded for a year to the day previously to making the trade for Jonah Jackson, and he'd obviously battled shoulder injuries all year and wound up on IR 2 different times and didn't give them the return on investment that they wanted. It's understandable to be a little bit skeptical with all things Chicago Bears because of the track record here. But Jonah Jackson, obviously, again, going back to the familiarity with Ben Johnson, he was there when he saw Jonah Jackson have his best season in 2021. He was a Pro Bowl honoree as a replacement player that year, and obviously can do some things up front for you. When you get him in space as a run blocker, he can be really, really dangerous. And so that's going to be a lot of what Ben Johnson is trying to put in place here during the offseason, is getting something that gets this offense jump-started in front of Caleb Williams. We heard him last week talk about the importance of establishing a running game, the importance of setting up play action. Those are all things that are going to help a young quarterback. Jonah Jackson should be a good piece to get that started.
So where do you place these two guys on the line? Because both primarily playing left guard, especially when you go back to Jackson playing left guard with the Lions. Joe Thuney is an all-pro left guard who could kick out to left tackle, as we saw him in the postseason. But do you keep Joe Thuney at where he's best, or do you put Jonah Jackson, the younger guy, at where he's best?
Yeah, I don't know. And there's been a couple different trains of thoughts on this already, trying to figure out who slots where. I think that's the benefit of having the spring. And the Bears will get that new coach minicamp in April before the draft to just kind of start the trial and error, the experimentation, try to figure out who's most comfortable at each spot. Sometimes it can be difficult for, even on the interior, for a lineman to switch sides. It's like driving on the other side of the road sometimes, and you've got to get comfort and just that feel for what it's like. And so I think there's going to be a little bit of trial and error and feel to that. But we'll see. The next time we get a chance to hear from Ryan Poles or Ben Johnson, I think that's going to be one of the top questions is, how do you see this setting up?
And hopefully the next time we hear from them is next week at the end of free agency, when they can sign everyone who they go after next week. And I think the question is, they've overhauled 2/3 of the interior of the offensive line. Ben Johnson was at the Combine last week saying you can do it in an entire offseason because the Panthers did it last year. They had the most expensive O-line, and we saw Bryce Young get better protection towards the end of the season. Do you think they still go out and sign a veteran center like a Drew Dahlman if it costs him $14 million to give that asset to Caleb Williams?
Well, you've eaten into your cap space pretty significantly with these two moves. Now, you can do some things if you decide to get an extension done with Joe Thuney next week to massage the cap numbers a little bit, but you have to be very cognizant of the number of different needs you have on this roster. They have to explore the defensive line and add some depth there, and so you have to put this entire puzzle together, understanding what your resources are and where you can get players. I would be surprised if they didn't try to attract a veteran option next week to play center for them, because you would love to pair Caleb Williams, a young quarterback, with somebody in front of him that has experience there. At the same time, you can try to play a little bit of chess with how you line those things up and what it's going to look like, because I do think that the most important thing is getting comfort for Caleb. It may not be shopping off the top shelf of free agency. You may have to take a bargain center and make things work. And by the way, Coleman Shelton may be an option for them to bring back if they so desire.
Was he serviceable enough for Caleb Williams and reliable enough for him to come back and you feel okay about that decision?
Yeah, I do think that it wouldn't make me lose sleep, because I do think down the back half of the season he played really well. He sort of found his footing, and when you surround him with two really good guards, all of a sudden you make that entire interior stronger, and now you can get away with some things there. But we'll see. They may decide on Monday that they want to get really aggressive in going after Drew Dahlman. If they do, I think this whole city would be kind of a buzz at what they did to the interior of the line.
I think. Most people are texting me right now saying the Bears are back. We believe in them again. Would you be shocked, given the news that Trey Hendrickson has requested a trade out of Cincinnati, if the Bears make a third trade and get an edge rusher who had 17.5 sacks the past 2 seasons to complement their defense and play opposite of Montez Sweat? Yeah,
led the league last year, and obviously is a proven player at the edge rushing position. Here's my reservation with that. Number one, you paid Montez Sweat big money. You remember the 4-year, $98 million extension they gave him shortly after trading for him to be that guy. And so now if you're going to dump more money into it, you're in some ways saying that you're not getting out of Montez Sweat what you thought you were going to get out of Montez Sweat. And I'm not really ready to go there, because you're going to have to give up draft capital. You're going to have to pay a lot of money in one position to try to get that pass rush some teeth. He does have familiarity with Dennis Allen from their days together in New Orleans, but I guess you asked if I'd be surprised. I would be surprised if they went after that one, and we'll just see what direction they go. But I do think there was an acknowledgement, and there has been since the season ended, that some way you have to get more from that pass rush, whether it's on the edge or in the interior.
So are you still a fan of maybe bringing in a Khalil Mack back on a more team-friendly deal? Doesn't need to be the star of the defense anymore, even though when he was in Chicago originally the highest paid defender at the time. Do you think he would be an asset to this defense and maybe some of the younger guys who could come up underneath him?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of guys like Khalil Mack out there that could maybe be gotten in the second or third wave of free agency, where you can let things play out and let the market come to you a little bit, and then find one of those veterans that's looking to find a home where they can be a complimentary pass rusher. The Mack discussion is interesting to me because I personally had the sense that when he left here, he was cool with leaving here, right? Like that Chicago was this big stage that he had a lot of success on early and had a lot of fun on during that 2018 season. But ultimately that Khalil likes laying behind the radar a little bit and laying low a little bit. And so I don't know what his desires are as he walks into free agency. It'll be interesting to see if anything there materializes. But certainly the Bears need to find another starting option there. They obviously let DeMarcus Walker go. Darrell Taylor is a free agent. His contract will expire next week if they can't get something done before that. And so you've got to add something there, and then you've got to put those puzzle pieces together using both free agency and the draft.
Saw some fans calling for Bosa. Is he going to come at too high of a price?
I would think that
or
would be
is he hasn't played much, honestly.
That's the biggest concern to me, is the durability has been an issue here the last couple seasons. And so name recognition is nice. It gets Twitter really, really excited. But what you're ultimately looking for is productivity in the fall. And there just hasn't been enough of that from Joey Bosa recently.
You were first to report that the Bears were interested in bringing in tight end Durham Smythe on a one-year deal. Reports that they're going to sign him. What does that allow for Ben Johnson to do in his offensive system, knowing he likes to play 12 personnel?
Yeah, look, like Cole Kmet was the only notable returner to that position group. So that was another position that walking into the week, you knew they were going to have to address some way, somehow. And obviously Durham Smythe let go last month in Miami, reunites with Ben Johnson. They spent a year together in Miami. It gives them a run blocker. It gives them a guy that can play in line and do some things that will help their running game get going. We just talked about it a couple minutes ago about the importance of the running game to Ben Johnson. Now he gets a guy whose track record he knows that can do the things he wants them to do. And also notable that he was on campus at Notre Dame for 1 year when Cole Kmet was a freshman at Notre Dame. So there's a little bit of carryover there as well.
I think when Ben Johnson got hired, because of the reports floating around that he wanted personnel control, there were a lot of questions of how much control would he have and how much influence would he have. I think this week was pretty defining for him and Ryan Poles and how they'll work together based off of the Jonah Jackson trade, number one, and then Durham Smythe and the familiarity there. Do you think this answered a lot of those questions too?
I'm still curious to watch how it evolves, because they have a lot to go, both with free agency next week, the week after that, and then the draft in April to make decisions that put this roster in a position to compete again. And they really got to get there quickly. I do think it's been a spoken goal since January from everyone inside the organization that they were going to be very aggressive this offseason. That aggression has been notable, and it's been impressive so far. Now the results have to follow it, but they're certainly not sitting on their hands waiting for everything to come to them. They're going out, understanding what their needs are, understanding what the market looks like, both in free agency and the draft, and they're attacking. And so I think that is part of Ben Johnson's personality that has shown itself a little bit early on here, and we'll see how that continues to evolve.
If they draft Ashton Genty, does that answer it for you? You can hang on to that thought if you want, because we will discuss it next. We're only talked about what the Bears might do in free agency. Yeah, we still have to talk about what they might do in the draft. Who will they take with the 10th overall pick? Is Ashton Genty back in play because of all these trades? Dan is back for another segment, and we'll discuss it next.